Part 1, The Shadow of Zara. The bustling markets of Zara were alive with the hum of activity. Alien species from across the galaxy bartered and traded, their voices blending into a cacophony of sounds. Caden moved through the crowd with practiced ease, his hood pulled low over his face. His enhanced senses picked up every whisper, every footstep, every shift in the air. He was a shadow, a ghost, and he preferred it that way. Tia watched him from a distance, her violet eyes sharp and calculating. She had been tracking him for months, studying his movements, his habits, his strengths. He was unlike anyone she had ever encountered, fast, strong, and impossibly skilled. But it wasn't just his abilities that intrigued her. It was the mystery that surrounded him, the whispers of a connection to a species long thought extinct. When she finally approached him, it was with a confidence that belied her nerves. "Caden," she said, her voice smooth and deliberate. "I need your help." He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You've been following me." "Yes," she admitted without hesitation. "And I've learned a lot about you. But there's more you need to know." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, hollow crystal. With a tap, it projected a holographic display between them. Images of Caden appeared, training, fighting, moving through crowds. But there were other images too, ancient texts and diagrams that spoke of warriors with abilities beyond anything known in the galaxy. "These are from the sealed archives on Centaur Prime," Tia explained. "They describe a species called humans. Warriors with strength, speed, and reflexes that defy logic. Sound familiar?" Caden's eyes narrowed. "Humans are myths. Bedtime stories." "Maybe," Tia said, stepping closer. "Or maybe they're real. And maybe you're one of them." Before Caden could respond, an explosion rocked the market. Alarms blared, and the crowd scattered in panic. Caden's instincts kicked in, and he grabbed Tia's arm, pulling her into the shadows. "They found us," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "How?" Tia asked, her eyes wide with fear. Caden's gaze fell on the hollow crystal still in her hand. "That thing isn't just a display. It's a beacon. You led them right to us." The realization hit Tia like a punch to the gut. "No," she whispered. "I didn't know. I swear." But there was no time for explanations. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the alley, and Caden knew they were out of time. He drew his sword, the blade humming to life with a soft blue glow. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his voice calm despite the chaos. "And try not to get shot." The Imperial troops rounded the corner, their plasma rifles raised. Caden moved like a blur, his blade deflecting the first volley of shots with precision. He struck with calculated efficiency, disabling weapons and disarming his enemies without killing them. He wouldn't give the Empire the satisfaction. But even with his enhanced abilities, the numbers were overwhelming. A glancing blow to his arm sent searing pain through his body, and he staggered, losing his focus for a moment. The troops pressed their advantage, firing a concentrated barrage that forced Caden to retreat. "We need to go," Tia shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. Caden nodded, his mind racing. He spotted a damaged power conduit near the ceiling and made a split-second decision. With a burst of speed, he vaulted over the heads of the troops and plunged his blade into the wires. The resulting explosion plunged the alley into darkness, giving them the distraction they needed. "Now!" Caden grabbed Tia's hand and pulled her toward a narrow ventilation shaft. They crawled through the cramped space, the sound of the Imperial troops fading behind them. When they finally emerged into a dimly lit maintenance corridor, Caden turned to Tia. "We need to get out of here. The Empire will be swarming this place soon." Tia nodded, her face pale but determined. "Where do we go?" Caden thought for a moment, then smiled, a dangerous, reckless smile. Centaur Prime. The Empire won't expect us to go there. And with that, their journey began. Part 2, The Betrayal and the Escape. The dimly lit maintenance corridor was eerily silent, save for the faint hum of distant machinery. Kaidan and Tia moved quickly, their footsteps echoing softly against the metal floor. Kaidan's senses were on high alert, every nerve in his body tuned to the slightest sound or movement. He knew the Imperial troops wouldn't give up easily. They were relentless, and they had the resources to hunt them down across the galaxy. Tia followed closely behind, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the guilt that gnawed at her. The hollow crystal, her key to unlocking the secrets of the archives, had been a trap. Someone had betrayed her, and now Kaidan was paying the price. She glanced at him, his face set in a grim mask of determination. Despite her betrayal, he had saved her. Why? Kaidan, she said softly, breaking the silence. I'm sorry. I didn't know the crystal would lead them to us. He didn't look back. Save the apologies for later. Right now, we need to focus on getting out of here alive. They reached a junction in the corridor, and Kaidan paused, scanning the area. He pulled out a small device from his coat, a portable scanner, and began mapping their surroundings. The lower levels of Zara were a maze of tunnels and passages, some of which hadn't been used in centuries. If they could find a way to the surface, they might have a chance. This way, Kaidan said, gesturing to a narrow passage on their left. There's an old transport hub up ahead. If we're lucky, we can find a ship. Tia nodded, her heart pounding. She had never been in a situation like this before. She was a scholar, not a fighter. But she couldn't afford to be a liability. She had to keep up. As they moved through the passage, the air grew colder, and the walls seemed to close in around them. The faint hum of machinery grew louder, and soon they emerged into a large chamber filled with abandoned vehicles and equipment. The transport hub. Kaidan scanned the area, his eyes narrowing. This place hasn't been used in years. But if we can get one of these ships operational, we might have a chance. Tia looked around, her eyes wide. The ships were old, their hulls covered in dust and rust. Do you really think we can get one of these to work? Kaidan smirked. I've worked with worse. He moved to the nearest ship, a small freighter that looked like it had seen better days. He climbed into the cockpit and began working on the controls, his fingers flying across the console. Tia watched in awe as he bypassed security protocols and rerouted power systems. Within minutes, the ship's engines sputtered to life. Get in, Kaidan said, his voice urgent. Tia didn't hesitate. She climbed into the co-pilot seat and strapped herself in. The ship shuddered as it lifted off the ground, the engine straining under the weight of years of neglect. Hold on, Kaidan warned, gripping the controls tightly. The ship shot forward, narrowly avoiding the walls of the chamber as it sped toward the exit. The sound of alarms echoed through the hub, and Kaidan knew they had triggered some kind of security system. They're on to us, Tia said, her voice tense. No kidding, Kaidan replied, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. The ship burst out of the transport hub and into the open air of Zara's lower levels. The city stretched out before them, a sprawling metropolis of towering skyscrapers and neon lights. But there was no time to admire the view. The sound of approaching ships filled the air, and Kaidan knew they were being pursued. We need to lose them, Tia said, her voice rising in panic. Working on it, Kaidan muttered, his hands moving quickly over the controls. He banked sharply to the left, weaving through the narrow gaps between buildings. The pursuing ships followed, their plasma cannons firing bursts of energy that lit up the night sky. Kaidan dodged and weaved, his reflexes pushed to the limit. They're gaining on us. Tia shouted, her knuckles white as she gripped the edges of her seat. Kaidan's mind raced. They couldn't outrun the Imperial ships forever. They needed a plan, and fast. His eyes fell on a nearby docking bay, its entrance partially hidden by a cluster of buildings. "Hang on," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos. He steered the ship toward the docking bay, the pursuing ships hot on their tail. At the last second, he pulled up sharply, sending the ship into a steep climb. The Imperial ships, caught off guard, slammed into the docking bay with a deafening explosion. Tia let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. That was insane. Caden allowed himself a small smile. Just another day in the life. But their relief was short-lived. The sound of more approaching ships filled the air, and Caden knew they weren't out of the woods yet. "We need to get out of Zara," Tia said, her voice urgent. "If we can make it to the outer rim, we might be able to lose them." Caden nodded. "Agreed. But we're going to need a better ship. This one won't make it past the atmosphere." He scanned the area, his eyes falling on a nearby spaceport. It was heavily guarded, but it was their only chance. "We're going to have to steal a ship," Caden said, his voice grim. Tia's eyes widened. "You're joking, right? Do I look like I'm joking?" She swallowed hard. "All right. What's the plan?" Caden's lips curved into a dangerous smile. "Follow my lead." They landed the ship on a nearby rooftop, out of sight of the Imperial forces. Caden quickly disabled the ship's tracking system, ensuring it wouldn't be used to follow them. Then, they made their way to the spaceport, moving silently through the shadows. The spaceport was a hive of activity, with ships coming and going at all hours. Caden and Tia blended into the crowd, their hoods pulled low to conceal their faces. Caden's eyes scanned the area, looking for their target. "There," he said, nodding toward a sleek, advanced-looking freighter. "That's our ticket out of here." Tia's heart raced as they approached the ship. The guards were heavily armed, and the security systems were state-of-the-art. But Caden moved with the confidence of someone who had done this before. He pulled out a small device and began working on the ship's security system. Within moments, the doors hissed open, and they slipped inside. "Get to the cockpit," Caden ordered, his voice low. "I'll handle the engines." Tia nodded and made her way to the front of the ship. She slid into the pilot's seat and began powering up the systems. The ship hummed to life, its controls responding to her touch. Caden joined her moments later, his face set in a determined expression. "Let's get out of here." The ship lifted off the ground, its engines roaring to life. The spaceport's alarms blared, and the guards scrambled to respond. But it was too late. Caden and Tia were already in the air, speeding toward the edge of the atmosphere. As they broke through Zara's atmosphere and into the cold void of space, Tia let out a sigh of relief. "We made it." Caden's expression remained grim. "We're not out of the woods yet. The Empire will be looking for us. We need to get to Centaur Prime." Tia nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then let's go." The ship shot forward, leaving Zara behind. The journey to Centaur Prime would be dangerous, but they had no other choice. The fate of a lost species, and perhaps the galaxy itself, depended on them. Part 4, The Forbidden Archives. The voice echoed through the vast chamber, its tone both welcoming and ominous. Caden and Tia stood frozen for a moment, their eyes scanning the room for the source of the sound. But the chamber was empty, save for the countless data crystals and holographic displays that filled the space. "Who's there?" Caden demanded, his hand instinctively reaching for his blade. The voice responded, calm and measured. "I am the guardian of these archives, the keeper of the truths you seek. But know this, the knowledge you desire comes at a price." Tia stepped forward, her curiosity outweighing her fear. "What kind of price?" "The truth can be a burden," the voice replied. "It can shatter illusions, challenge beliefs, and change the course of destinies. Are you prepared to face what lies ahead? Caden's jaw tightened. We didn't come this far to turn back now. The voice fell silent, and the chamber seemed to grow colder. Caden and Tia exchanged glances, their resolve hardening. They had come too far to let a disembodied voice deter them. Let's start searching, Caden said, his voice low. They moved deeper into the chamber, their footsteps echoing in the vast space. The data crystals were arranged in rows, each one glowing faintly with an inner light. Tia approached one of the displays, her fingers brushing against the surface. The holographic screen flickered to life, projecting images of ancient texts and diagrams. This is incredible, Tia whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. These records date back thousands of years. They could hold the answers we're looking for. Caden nodded, his eyes scanning the rows of crystals. We need to find anything related to humanity. If there's even a shred of evidence that they survived, it'll be here. They began their search in earnest, combing through the archives for any mention of humanity. The task was daunting, the sheer volume of information overwhelming. But they worked tirelessly, driven by the hope of uncovering the truth. Hours passed, and the chamber remained silent, save for the soft hum of the holographic displays. Caden's frustration grew with each passing moment. They had found records of countless species, civilizations, and events, but nothing about humanity. Maybe we're looking in the wrong place, Tia said, her voice tinged with disappointment. Caden shook his head. No. The answers are here. We just have to keep looking. As they continued their search, Tia stumbled upon a section of the archives that seemed different from the rest. The data crystals here were darker, their glow dimmer. She reached out to touch one, and the holographic display flickered to life, projecting an image of a star map. Caden, look at this, she called, her voice filled with excitement. He joined her, his eyes narrowing as he studied the map. What is it? It's a star map, Tia explained, her fingers tracing the lines of the projection. But it's not like any I've seen before. These coordinates, they lead to a system that's not on any modern charts. Caden's heart raced. Could it be? It's possible, Tia said, her voice trembling with excitement. This could be the location of a hidden human colony. Before they could investigate further, the voice echoed through the chamber once more. You have found what you seek, it said. But beware, the path ahead is fraught with peril. The Empire will not allow you to leave with this knowledge. Caden's hand tightened around the hilt of his blade. We'll take our chances. The voice fell silent, and the chamber seemed to grow darker. Caden and Tia exchanged glances, their determination unwavering. They had found a lead, and they weren't about to let it slip away. We need to get this data to the ship, Caden said, his voice urgent. Tia nodded, quickly downloading the information onto a portable device. As she worked, Caden kept watch, his senses on high alert. He knew the Empire would be closing in, and they didn't have much time. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the chamber. Caden turned, his blade humming to life as a group of Imperial troops entered the room, their weapons raised. Hand over the data, their leader demanded, his voice cold and commanding. Caden stepped forward, his eyes blazing with defiance. You'll have to take it from me. The troops opened fire, their plasma bolts lighting up the chamber. Caden moved with lightning speed, his blade deflecting the shots with precision. He closed the distance between them, striking with calculated efficiency. The first trooper went down with a disabled weapon, the second with a dislocated shoulder. Tia watched in awe, her heart pounding in her chest. She had seen Caden fight before, but never like this. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of destruction. But even with his enhanced abilities, the numbers were overwhelming. The troops pressed their advantage, their weapons trained on Caden. He took a glancing blow to the arm, the heat searing through his coat. He staggered, momentarily losing his focus. Caden. Tia shouted, her voice filled with panic. He gritted his teeth, pushing through the pain. Get to the ship. I'll hold them off. Tia hesitated, her heart torn. She couldn't leave him, not like this. But she knew they had no other choice. Go! Caden shouted, his voice filled with urgency. Tia nodded, her eyes filled with determination. She turned and ran, clutching the portable device tightly. The sound of blaster fire echoed behind her as she made her way through the archives, her heart pounding in her chest. She reached the entrance to the chamber, her breath coming in ragged gasps. But before she could step through, a figure appeared in the doorway, blocking her path. It was the Inquisitor. Going somewhere? He asked, his voice dripping with malice. Tia's heart sank. She was trapped, with no way out. But she refused to give up. She clutched the device tightly, her mind racing for a solution. The Inquisitor stepped closer, his eyes gleaming with triumph. Hand over the data, and I might let you live. Tia's eyes narrowed, her resolve hardening. You'll have to kill me first. The Inquisitor smiled, a cold, cruel smile. As you wish. He raised his weapon, aiming it directly at Tia. But before he could fire, a blur of motion caught his attention. Caden appeared behind him, his blade humming with energy. Leave her alone, Caden growled, his voice filled with rage. The Inquisitor turned, his weapon still trained on Tia. You're too late, human. The Empire will have its prize. Caden's eyes blazed with fury. Not while I'm still breathing. He lunged at the Inquisitor, his blade striking with deadly precision. The two clashed in a flurry of sparks and steel, their movements a blur of speed and skill. Tia watched in awe, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she had to act, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the battle. Finally, Caden gained the upper hand, disarming the Inquisitor and pinning him to the ground. This is for humanity, Caden said, his voice filled with determination. He plunged his blade into the Inquisitor's chest, the energy from the weapon surging through the man's body. The Inquisitor let out a final, gurgling breath before collapsing to the ground. Caden turned to Tia, his chest heaving with exertion. Let's go. They ran through the archives, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The sound of blaster fire grew louder behind them as more Imperial troops closed in. Part 3, The Journey to Centaur Prime. The void of space stretched endlessly before them, a vast expanse of stars and darkness. Caden guided the stolen freighter through the silent void, his hands steady on the controls. Tia sat beside him, her eyes fixed on the navigation screen. Centaur Prime loomed in the distance, a swirling blue and green marble against the black canvas of space. We're approaching the outer defenses, Tia said, her voice tense. The Empire's orbital security grid is one of the most advanced in the galaxy. If they detect us. They won't, Caden interrupted, his tone confident. I've bypassed worse. Tia glanced at him, her violet eyes filled with doubt. You're sure about this? He didn't answer immediately, his focus entirely on the task at hand. The freighter's scanners picked up the first signs of the orbital defenses, a network of satellites and drones designed to detect and destroy unauthorized ships. Caden's fingers danced across the controls, rerouting power to the ship's cloaking system. Hold on, he said, his voice calm but firm. The ship shuddered as it entered the outer layer of the security grid. Alarms blared on the console, warning of incoming threats. Caden ignored them, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. We're being scanned, Tia warned, her voice rising in panic. I know, Caden replied, his tone steady. The ship's cloaking system flickered, struggling to maintain its integrity under the intense scrutiny of the Empire's scanners. Caden's hands moved quickly, adjusting the frequency and power output to avoid detection. For a moment, it seemed like they might make it through undetected. Then, a loud beep echoed through the cockpit, and the navigation screen lit up with a warning. "They've locked onto us," Tia shouted, her heart pounding. Caden's jaw tightened. Time for Plan B. He pulled the ship into a steep dive, narrowly avoiding a barrage of plasma fire from the orbital defenses. The freighter's engines roared as he pushed them to their limits, weaving through the maze of satellites and drones. "This is insane," Tia yelled, gripping the edges of her seat. "You wanted adventure," Caden shot back, a hint of a smirk on his lips. The ship shuddered violently as a plasma bolt grazed its hull, sending sparks flying through the cockpit. Caden cursed under his breath but kept his focus, his hands steady on the controls. "We're almost through," he said, his voice strained. Tia's eyes widened as she saw the planet's surface growing larger in the viewport. "You're not planning to land this thing manually, are you? Do you see an autopilot?" Caden replied, his tone dry. The freighter plunged through the atmosphere, buffeted by strong winds and turbulence. Caden fought to maintain control, his eyes fixed on the landing coordinates. The ship's alarms blared, warning of structural damage and overheating engines. "We're not going to make it," Tia shouted, her voice filled with panic. "We'll make it," Caden said, his voice calm but firm. The ship shuddered violently as it approached the surface, the ground rushing up to meet them. At the last second, Caden pulled up sharply, leveling the ship just enough to avoid a catastrophic crash. The freighter slammed into the ground with a bone-jarring thud, skidding to a halt in a cloud of dust and debris. For a moment, there was silence. Then, Caden let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "We're here." Tia stared at him, her face pale. "That was the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced." Caden allowed himself a small smile. "You get used to it." They climbed out of the ship, stepping into the cool, dry air of Centaur Prime's surface. The landscape was barren and desolate, a stark contrast to the bustling cities of Zara. Towering cliffs and rocky canyons stretched out before them, their surfaces weathered by centuries of wind and erosion. "The archives are located deep beneath the surface," Tia said, consulting a handheld device. "There's an access point about 5 kilometers from here, an abandoned mining tunnel." Caden nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Then let's get moving. The Empire won't be far behind." They set off through the rocky terrain, the sun beating down on their backs. The journey was grueling, the uneven ground and harsh conditions testing their endurance. But neither of them complained. They had come too far to turn back now. As they walked, Tia found herself studying Caden. There was something about him, something she couldn't quite put into words. He was a mystery, a puzzle she was determined to solve. "Caden," she said, breaking the silence. "Why are you doing this? Why risk your life for a species that might not even exist?" He didn't answer immediately, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and thoughtful. "Because if there's even a chance that humanity survived, I have to know. They're my people, Tia. My family." Tia nodded, her heart swelling with admiration. She had always been driven by curiosity, by the desire to uncover the truth. But Caden's motivation was deeper, more personal. It was a reminder of why she had started this journey in the first place. They reached the mining tunnel after several hours of walking. The entrance was partially hidden by a cluster of rocks, its dark mouth leading deep into the earth. Caden activated a light on his wrist, illuminating the narrow passage. "This is it," Tia said, her voice filled with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Caden nodded, his expression grim. "Let's go." They entered the tunnel, their footsteps echoing in the darkness. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay, a testament to the tunnel's long abandonment. Caden's senses were on high alert, his instincts warning him of potential dangers. As they walked deeper into the tunnel, the temperature dropped, and the air grew colder. Caden could feel the weight of the earth pressing down on them, a reminder of how far they were from the surface. Suddenly, the tunnel opened into a large cavern. In the center of the cavern stood a massive metal door, sealed shut with intricate locks and energy barriers. "This is it," Tia whispered, her voice filled with awe. "The entrance to the archives." Caden's eyes scanned the security measures, his mind racing. The door was heavily fortified, designed to keep intruders out at all costs. But he had faced worse. "Stand back," he said, pulling out a small device from his coat. Tia watched in fascination as Caden worked on the door's control panel, his fingers flying across the surface. The device beeped and whirred, its lights flashing as it bypassed the security protocols. After several tense moments, the door hissed open, revealing a long, dark corridor. "We're in," Caden said, his voice filled with determination. They stepped into the corridor, their senses on high alert. The air was cold and still, the silence broken only by the sound of their own footsteps. Caden could feel the presence of ancient technology all around them, a sleeping giant waiting to be awakened. As they walked deeper into the archives, they encountered more security measures, laser grids, pressure plates, and automated sentries. Caden's skills and technology allowed them to bypass most of the obstacles, but some required more creative solutions. At one point, they were confronted by a pair of robotic guardians, towering machines armed with plasma cannons. Caden knew they couldn't take them head-on, not without risking serious injury. "I have an idea," Tia said, her eyes gleaming with excitement. She led Caden down a side passage, her movements quick and purposeful. They reached a small chamber filled with ancient computers and control panels. Tia began working on the systems, her fingers flying across the keyboards.